Britain's new head of the RAF, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, said of US Air Force legend John Boyd, "Like most fighter pilots," Rich Knighton is an engineer by background, "he took a certain pleasure in his profanity, crudeness and coarseness of humour." So what would Boyd have said about Ukraine being gifted US F-16s, an aircraft programme he helped start, and possibly Swedish Gripen fighter jets to attack Russia? I think he would have said, "Fucking A, man!" By all accounts, Boyd was a difficult man to work with, irascible, uncompromising and contemptuous of senior military leaders. However, whilst flying his F-86 Saberjet in the Korean War, Colonel John Boyd had a brainwave that means he is remembered today as one of the 20th century's greatest strategists, an architect of possibly the most enduring model of how to win at war and business. Observe, orientate, decide, act, better known as the OODA loop. How do pilots win aerial dogfights, he mused? First, they have to keep a good observation, constantly demanding new information from the environment around them. Second, they must orientate themselves to the situation or threat. Next, decide what to do, and finally act in as swift and efficient a manner as possible. Observe, orientate, decide, act. It sounds straightforward, simplistic even, but as a decision-making model, it works. Whether you're trying to reform your boardroom or shoot down Chinese MiG-15s over Korea by pulling a tighter turn than them, loading your body with high G-force as you do so, something I experienced a little of when having a go in the RAF's new centrifuge trainer. And no, I wasn't sick, and no, I didn't pass out.
You sit down.
But I did need a little sit down afterwards with a cup of tea and a biscuit. What has all this got to do with F-16s to Ukraine? Well, as Chief of the Air Staff said in his first major speech in post, Boyd was interested in battles where numerically superior forces lost to smaller forces, and how those smaller forces used deception, speed and fluidity of action to disorientate, confuse and ultimately unravel the enemy. Ukraine could do with a bit of that right now, as they try to smash through the formidable line of Russian defences in the south of the country. Since the start of the full-scale invasion last year, neither side has been able to dominate the sky, which says as much about the weakness of the Russian Air Force as it does about the tenacity of Ukraine's. That is unlikely to change anytime soon. But Kyiv would have been delighted last weekend when, after a whirlwind tour of European capitals, President Zelensky secured promises of dozens of modern fighter jets for his Air Force. How modern though? Light blue types talk about different generations of aircraft. Now, there's no hard and fast rule, but generally each successive generation was marked by a step change in technology and innovation. So whilst first generation jets like the Meteor were subsonic, second generation aircraft could go faster than sound and do more stuff. Third generation, so think Vietnam era, could go faster still, and technology like Doppler radars was introduced, meaning fighters had what's called look down, shoot down capability. By the 1960s, radar technology had evolved to be able to look down and differentiate between the ground, which isn't moving, and an enemy jet that is. So that's third generation. But this stuff's starting to get really expensive now, and the idea of designers building aircraft for specific roles, and those roles only, is looking pretty unaffordable. Fourth generation aircraft, therefore, are those that can do the air-to-air dogfighting role, which generally calls for a slower, more manoeuvrable aircraft, back to Boyd's original OODA loop, as well as doing the air-to-ground bombing role, for which sleek, super-duper fast jets are best. They may not be very manoeuvrable, so were rubbish in a dogfight, but could whiz in and out of harm's way before anyone knew they were there to drop a little bucket of sunshine, i.e. a nuclear bomb, as I was once told by a tornado pilot. Now look, so-called swing roll aircraft have been around since the First World War, with a machine gun to fire at the Red Baron whilst the navigator sitting in the backseat bungs a bomb over the side. But it would be hard pushed to get anyone to buy into the idea that they were fourth generation aircraft. As I said, it's not an exact science. The F-16, however, was one of the first swing roll proper fourth generation jets. It had a Doppler look down shoot down radar, big wings for manoeuvrability, and a massive bubble cockpit, so the pilot had brilliant visibility all round, including most of what was directly underneath the jet. That meant it could do the air-to-ground bombing thing, but with a terrific engine could also fly high enough, where the air is thinner so the missiles go further, to shoot down other planes at long ranges. It's the Swiss Army knife of fighter planes. Another brilliant aircraft that may be on the way to Ukraine is the Swedish Gripen. The Gripen is a magnificent jet, designed specifically to counter Russian surface-to-air missiles and fast jets by flying extremely low and having a very capable electronic warfare suite incorporated into the aircraft and not carried as an optional extra. It can also operate from dispersed bases, including rough airstrips or even motorways, which will be particularly helpful. From the very first hours of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian Air Force has had to operate from austere locations, well away from their normal and highly maintained bases that Russia has repeatedly hit. Such places do not offer the pristine, smooth and debris-free runways so beloved of most fighter aircraft, covered as they are with FOD, or foreign object debris, a military term essentially meaning rubbish, sticks and old crisp packets. Unlike the British Typhoon and F-16s, with air intakes low down on the fuselage and therefore more susceptible to sucking FOD into the engine, Gripen can operate from rough airstrips. They're also not as mechanically needy as some Western cousins, so while smaller in number, they have a much lower logistic footprint, which is very handy when mixing your fleets. Of course, the jet is just part of the battle. Without a robust logistic chain of spare parts and qualified engineering staff, Ukraine will be left with nothing more than very shiny show ponies rather than thoroughbred hunters. Weapons too need to be optimised for the aircraft. An F-16 will electronically talk to a high-speed anti-radiation missile, the HARM missiles designed to home in on enemy air defence radars, in a way that, say, a MiG-29 can't. The F-16 will use its own systems to detect enemy radar and pass that information to the HARM prior to launch. With the MiG, it's more a question of firing the HARM off and hoping it finds something on the way down. None of these things are silver bullets though. NATO commanders admit that even they would have trouble punching through a layered air defence network such as the one Russia has established over southern Ukraine. Gone are the days of enduring air superiority. The best that can realistically be hoped for now by air forces up against a peer competitor is to achieve temporary ownership of a small chunk of airspace. That may allow a COMAO, or composite air operation, to take place. These missions consist of a mixture of different types of aircraft doing different things, usually to achieve an effect on the ground. So in order to allow an armoured tank thrust through enemy forces, for example, electronic warfare jamming planes would go first to confuse enemy air defence radars for long enough to allow other jets carrying HARM-type weapons to blast a hole in the enemy network, into which a series of combat air patrol jets could briefly go hunting for targets on the ground, clearing the way for friendly tanks to get stuck into the close battle. The ground battle would need to be wrapped up before the enemy filled in that hole in their air defence network and the close air support had to scoot out of there. All in all, not an easy task, no matter how long you've practiced it. So even if, or when, Ukraine is able to field fleets of F-16s and Gripens, having trained the pilots and engineers, built the bases and bought all the spares, knitting all that together to be able to coordinate effects on the ground will still be some way off. So why have they put such effort into getting the jets? Well, partly because you have to start somewhere, but also because knowing these things are on the way will give Russia pause for thought. It might make them bring plans forward before they're properly ready, or change future strategy fearful of the new threat in the sky. It could mean the numerically smaller force has deceived, disorientated, and confused the numerically superior force, leading ultimately to their unravelling. Maybe by just securing agreement to get hold of the jets at some indeterminate point in the future, Ukraine has already got inside Russia's OODA loop, and John Boyd would have smiled at that. Defence in Depth is a weekly video output by the Telegraph of the big defence stories. If you'd like a daily fix of content about the war in Ukraine, I'd suggest Ukraine the Latest, the Telegraph's podcast. For more defence stories, we've left links in the description below, and if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments. Please do visit our website for the latest updates, news and analysis, or failing that, you could buy a paper.